Hi everyone. So in this video, we're going to be covering two concepts. First is changing identity, and the second will be television and how that is kind of impacted by identity. So starting with changing identity. Changing identity, we think about all that all the time, right? We constantly change, right? Throughout life, we become different people. When we're in school, we're one person. When we're outside of school, we're another. So, I've talked about the temporal aspect of identity a lot. That also plays into changing identity. But so think about all the different times that your identity does change. So some of those kind of the starting points or the ignition points for that identity change could be moving. So you go from one area to another, if you move from the north to the south, or if you move from a different country to the US, there's pieces of that you're going to end up changing your identity just to try to kind of fit that new environment a little bit better, or because you're changing because you're in a new place, new school, new job, different relationships. So this can be getting into new relationships. So if we think of like personal relationships, but it can also be at one time when you're with your group of friends, you're going to be different than you are when you're with your family. So your identity could change even within the day. Responsibilities. So, when you become a parent, you have different responsibilities, and so that changes your identity. There's different kind of things that are the first things that come to your mind about who or what makes you who you are. So responsibilities can impact that quite a bit. We also can sometimes change our identities when we're trying to build our self-esteem. So this is going to be something we're going to talk about quite a bit in this lecture. It's when your identity or who you are starts to not give you the positive connotations that you want it to have. So when we talked before about in-group and out-group, it relates to that concept quite a bit when we're thinking about building our self-esteem through the identities that we hold. So also just the passage of time. I talk about it a lot. You're probably sick of me talking about time in relation to identity, but it's a big part of it. So just over time, we become different people, different experiences, different likes, different interests. All of these different things will change over time, and they impact identity, whether we're aware of it or not. So one of the theories I want to talk about today is optimal distinctiveness theory. Take a minute and just kind of think about what you think that might mean just based on the name, optimal distinctiveness. So distinctiveness is something that, particularly in American culture, we really like thinking that we're unique, right? So this is being the perfect level of unique. Essentially, it's the balance between our need for inclusion, so being part of something, and then our need for being different or unique, standing out within that crowd that we're a part of. So we don't want to be too different, because that starts to get scary when you can't find people who understand you or think similarly to you or look the same as you. But we also don't want to be exactly the same. When we're exactly the same, there's nothing to kind of set us apart. So we don't get that self-esteem boost by thinking that we are better than the outside or other people. So there's that kind of perfect balance that we're always looking for. That would be the optimal distinctiveness in our identities. So you can think of this as a continuum. So one side will be completely unique, one of a kind throughout the world, throughout history. And then there's the other end, which is complete conformity. So exactly the same as everybody else that you're around. And so people will try to be somewhere on this continuum. It'll vary depending on different cultures, religions, ethnic backgrounds, ages, all of those different things. But typically we find that people want to be more toward the center of it. So you want to be unique in some ways, but you also still want to fit in. You want to feel like you're still part of some bigger whole. And so here you can see a more visual model for that idea of the threat to your group membership based on distinctiveness. So if we look kind of top center here at optimal identity, this is where you're feeling really good in your situation, you're comfortable in your identity, you're comfortable in your place in the group, and it feels secure. And then something happens, and within that group, you kind of start to get shuffled out to the side. So there's something about what you are doing, what you're expressing, how you're portraying yourself, that starts to become niche within that bigger group. And so that group starts to kind of shuffle you out to the side. And so your inclusion in the group starts to be threatened. So then you realize that you have the awareness and you change. You try to become more of what the bigger portion of the group is. And so you're still kind of trying to maintain that distinctiveness, but you're actually kind of turning it down a little bit to fit within the bigger whole. So instead of being shuffled out to that side group, you're trying to be part of the main group. And so when you get to that right balance of distinctiveness, but unique, but kind of group membership at the same kind of balanced out level, that's where you start to find that secure, optimal identity place again. So that's where you start to feel fully included. You have the right level of differentiation, but the right level of kind of get along with the rest of the group. So, think of examples when you've maybe felt this sort of threat to your identity. So you're in a really good place, some kind of threat comes in from the outside, and then you change yourself to differentiate to get back to a more secure place. So I have an example for you guys. Hopefully we're all aware of NSYNC, the greatest band to ever exist in the history of human civilization. If you don't know NSYNC, I'm very sorry. Go look them up. They're wonderful. So when I was in my peak around 1998, 1999, NSYNC was my everything. And so specifically this one here, so with the red circle, it's Joey Fatone, best NSYNC member. And so, being a fan of NSYNC, big group I was a part of. But so within that group, I wanted to kind of, you could think of it in a way that I wanted to be special. And so most people were Justin or JC fans. Probably know who Justin is. If you don't know who JC is, please do yourself a favor and go listen to that man's voice. So most people were in one of those two categories. And so there's still 3 other members, Joey, Chris, and Lance. And so I was a Joey fan, and he kind of set himself apart with this kind of red hair. But then that red hair, because it was different and it was cool and it was the 90s and this is what people did, got more fans to move to favoring Joey. So then for me, I was part of the bigger group, but I was special because I was a Joey fan. But then all of these other people became Joey fans as well. So for me to stay part of my bigger group, but still have the right kind of level of distinctiveness that I wanted, then I started favoring Chris because he had this special hairdo. So can you see here, this is an example of it. You're part of a group, you kind of get along with it, you fit within it, but then you have a special place. And then when that special place starts to become threatened or isn't as special, then you move to have a new special place. So still, there weren't as many Chris fans, even though he had this glorious hair, right? So I was still part of the bigger NSYNC fandom, but I was now in this smaller group that was specifically Chris fans. Hopefully you can see the example there playing out, and you can probably think of examples within your own life. So you can kind of see how all of this tracks there, right? You can see how this model makes sense and starts to explain optimal distinctiveness theory. So we also change our identities through our socialization. So this QR code should work for you to be able to pull this up in a much easier to read format. But essentially, I want you to spend a couple minutes looking at this idea of how we kind of map out socialization. So essentially, we come into the world with certain characteristics that are just born with us, right? It's like our race or our nationality, the languages that we start to hear when we're children, the way that we start to develop our communication. But then we're socialized in really, at that stage, usually familial ways. So we start to understand the family. We have the same characteristics of our family members. We develop accents like our parents have. We develop the ability to share or not based on our siblings, the other young people we're around. Then we move into school, and that's where the institutions start to socialize us. So that's where, I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was in school, we would get up and say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. And so we're socialized into this sort of practice of being an American. And so there's other things like that within school that you're socialized to do, to think that these are the norms and this is how it's supposed to be. And then that starts to shape who you are further. You're socialized in more institutions, so now you're all WVU students, and so you're being socialized in that way, where somebody who's a student at Brigham Young University is being socialized in a different way. So we start to kind of branch out, and we get all these different institutionalized impacts on our socialization, and then that circles through to make us who we are. And so we keep going through this cycle, right? Because we develop our own families when we get older. And so we'll have a spouse from a different background, and that starts to come and have impact into how we socialize our own children. And that cycle just kind of keeps going. So that's why it's a cycle and not a direct line. But so you can think about all those different impacts that will socialize us over time and how those will then have an impact on our changing behavior, right? Spend some time with this. Look at the actual map a little bit more clearly. I'm sure you can't read it on the screen. So check out the PDF version and really get comfortable with this idea of socialization as a cycle, a continuing process. So now moving on to TV. So I know that TV isn't as popular for a lot of you as it would have been for, the generation before, because you guys have lots of different kinds of media that have started to replace a lot of what traditional television was. But streaming and things like that are still very popular. And so within the US at least, TV does still have a pretty big impact on identity, how we kind of shape our stereotypes that we hold of different groups of people. So TV is huge, right? So in 2022, 5.5 billion people were using TVs regularly, and that's out of like a little bit less than 8 billion people in the world in total. So pretty much everybody's on a TV, right? It's a huge part of our lives, particularly in the US. It's even a bigger part of our lives. And so it has changed, and it's kind of branched out with streaming a little bit. So it's the process of watching TV is a little bit different. It's not as much like when I was a kid. Friday night, everybody was watching TGIF on ABC. So everybody watched the same 4 sitcoms every Friday. Everybody knew exactly what was happening. There's not really anything anymore where people all know that something's happened on television. Like the Friends finale when I was in high school or college, maybe it was a really big deal and everybody watched it. There's nothing everybody's watching anymore. But still, within your own kind of social groups, there will be things that everybody has kind of a collective consciousness about. So, Netflix has taken over in a lot of ways. There's lots of other streaming now. And so sometimes you can even ascribe different identities to people based on the streaming services they're using, right? So Netflix maybe has a certain demographic, where Paramount Plus has another, Disney Plus has another. So think about all of these sorts of stereotypes that we have started to hold and to put onto people based on how they're consuming their TV. I'm going to put up a couple different TV shows here, and I know that in your mind you're going to create a stereotype of who you think might be watching that show. So like NCIS, grandparents, a lot of times what I hear. Certainly my grandfather was a very big NCIS fan. Real Housewives of New Jersey, right? Who is watching the show? What's their target demographic? Who watches Bravo? The Mandalorian, right? Who is watching these Star Trek or Star Wars type shows? You can see I'm not watching Star Wars. This Is Us. Who watches that, right? That kind of like trauma, drama, regular show, like the shows where people like to just watch it and cry. Who is that target demographic? Supernatural. You guys are going to be watching more about Supernatural this week, and so think about who is that specific fan base and why. West Wing, it's another one. Like if you watch The West Wing, we all know that you are a very intelligent person with excellent choice in television, right? You love to watch good TV. West Wing is my favorite show. So why do we do this? I've talked a little bit about like the type of people who watch certain shows, and so you can also kind of elaborate or build off of that to think about why are we watching it. So for me, I watch TV a lot to have something going on in the background. I have really bad ADHD, and the only way that I can focus is with lots of distractions going on. Like my brain needs to be overly stimulated to be able to focus on anything at all. So like I did my entire PhD with Dateline playing in the background. So my dissertation has been written with a like soundtrack of murder. And so that's just how it works for me. So TV in some cases is, that sort of tool for me when I'm grading your guys' work. A lot of times there's TV in the background. Other times people watch TV to learn, right? Lots of documentaries. TV can actually teach a lot. I used to watch the History Channel documentaries when the History Channel had documentaries all the time, and I learned so much from that. We also watch TV to escape, right? But how does it influence our day-to-day lives? So a lot of you I know will have, grown up in times where there was that appointment viewing on television. And so it did shape, okay, I'm not going to do anything on a Thursday because I want to be home to be able to watch Friends and ER. That doesn't really happen anymore. A lot of people probably don't even know what day of the week their favorite show comes on. It's just you stream it whenever. So we're a lot more flexible maybe now than we used to be. So TV doesn't have that sort of hold on us, but we're still watching it, or maybe we're watching it on the bus on the way to work, things like that. So here we can also see that people do say that media shapes who we are. It shapes the identities that we develop for ourselves, the identities that we claim for ourselves. And so a lot of times we feel that sort of distinctiveness, right? So we want to watch a show that maybe not everybody is watching. So a lot of young people aren't watching NCIS because it feels like a show that's for everybody's parents and grandparents. And so they want to be different than that. They don't want to just be in that big group. But so they'll watch something else that's streaming somewhere, but it's something that their friend group is aware of. They're not trying to do something that nobody else they know would like. They want it to kind of fit in that perfect medium where it's not everybody's watching it. We don't want to be part of millions and millions and millions of other people. We want to be special. But so we're going to watch this show that connects to our interests or our beliefs or our passions in the moment, right? So we're going to look for shows that can tell people something about who we want them to think we are. Okay. And now this last slide here is just kind of some key points that you should know by now. So essentially this is a summary of all of the really important concepts that we've covered up until this point in the semester. So please take a minute, look it over, make sure you're comfortable and familiar with all of the terms. These are all terms that should be reflected on your concept maps. We're going to come back to them one more time this semester. So look through these. If you're unsure of anything, go back, watch previous lectures, or even just Google it. Google can be a good resource a lot of the time if you use it well. So be comfortable with all of these concepts. All right, that's it.